At the end of the last mini lecture, I briefly went over various research methods that are used to test theories and to support theories, but we didn't have time to go over each of those, at least in that lecture. So I want to briefly do that right now. So research and theory have a symbiotic relationship with one another because you require research in order to build your theories, and you need research in order to test your theories. These and different theories use different methodological approaches. So many of you might be familiar with the notion of an experiment. An experiment, this is where investigators manipulate a particular variable to see its effect on something. So for example, let's suppose that I have a list of political positions on healthcare, and I have these listed on a sheet of paper. And to half the people in my experiment, I tell them that this is the Democratic candidate's position. But to the other half, they believe that this is the Republican candidate's position. So my hypothesis would be that people believing that the position is held by a Democratic candidate will see those political positions as more liberal and less conservative than people thinking it was from the Republican candidate's position. My explanation for that is that stereotypes people have about political party affiliations influences their perception of political activity in reality. So experiments are a very common way in which theories are tested, but you can also use surveys and questionnaires. And on surveys and questionnaires, this is where people will answer either on a paper or online, face-to-face, or over the phone, a couple of things, either a set of scales, such as, for example, on a scale of 1 to 5, how credible are the speaker's arguments for gun control? So let's suppose you've just listened to a speaker make a speech on gun control. You also see this when you mark your impressions of teachers with regard to how much you agree or disagree with the statements such as the teacher was highly organized, the class was interesting, and things like that. That's when it's on scales. That generates numbers, and that's quantitative, examples of quantitative research. By the way, I forgot to mention, experiments are almost always mostly focused on quantitative research methods. But surveys may also have open-ended questions. So after you listen to the speaker, rather than giving you a scale, I might ask you, what do you think about the speaker's message about gun control? And then you, in a text box or on paper or something, will talk about your perceptions and your feelings about what that speaker was talking about. Now, textual analysis is when we look at messages, in particular words and images and things like that, and we do a content or thematic analysis of those words and images. And these can come from any place. It could come from the open-ended questions that I mentioned above in the surveys. That could be some text, the words that are used there for textual analysis. It could be movies, advertisements, TV, newscasts. It could be any number of things. Those are the most common forms of textual analysis. So, for example, one thing that a researcher might be interested in is in a television drama series, how have the images of African American characters changed over the past 20 years? Ethnography, this is where a researcher immerses him or herself into a particular group in order to identify key practices, norms, and authority. So for example, this is where these usually are longer-term studies where a person will go and stay with the group for some extended period of time. While they're there, they will take notes, observe the action, they'll interview people, and in order to provide an understanding of what, how, and why the communication patterns are observed, accounts for what communication patterns they have observed. So for example, a researcher might spend several nights in an emergency room to observe the communication actions that physicians and nurses use in order to determine and coordinate between which patients are to stay in the emergency room and for how long, which ones need to be moved and handed off to the hospital and have them take care of them from there, and how many are now in a position to be sent home. In an emergency room, there's lots of activity that's going on, and it does require quite a bit of coordination among the participants in order to make these particular decisions. Now, the last thing is the difference between social science and humanities. I don't really need to talk about that anymore right now. I think the best thing to do is just read pages 24 through 27 in the book with particular attention to Table 2.2. That table provides a good opportunity to ask a test question, so I think it's pretty straightforward. So pay attention to that.